Hello everyone, my name is Ross Donahue. I'm a cartographer on the Esri StoryMaps team.
And I'm Alan Carroll. I'm founder of the StoryMaps team here at Esri.
And I'm Grayson Harris, product engineer and storyteller on the StoryMaps team.
We want to welcome you all to our first StoryMaps Live event. People are tuning in still, and we're really excited to kick this off with Gabby Salazar, who is our featured speaker. So the goal of StoryMaps Live is to help people get started using ArcGIS StoryMaps. We also want to feature storytellers with the rest of the StoryMaps community. And it's also to communicate new enhancements to the product. So every 2 to 3 months, there are new enhancements coming to ArcGIS StoryMaps. And we want to be able to tell you about those exciting new features. Just a quick word of note, we'll be using the live chat function within our webinar. So feel free to add any questions that you have for us anytime throughout the webinar. We will have specific times allocated where we will take questions and answer them directly from you. So we're really excited to have you all with us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alan Carroll here.
Thanks, Ross. It's such a pleasure to have you here. We're really excited to do this and hope you'll find it useful. I'm going to give the very, very basics. This may be old news to some of you, but just to make sure that everybody knows what a story map is, I'm going to answer that question. What's a story map? So story maps are web applications that combine interactive maps that, for the most part, are hosted on Esri's cloud resource, ArcGIS Online, with multimedia content. So that's your photos and videos and sometimes audio, and your text, of course, to tell stories about the world. And by world, I mean the world, literally the world and everything that's in it, and at all scales, from neighborhoods to the whole planet, occasionally beyond the whole planet. They work on a variety of screen sizes, so what that means is that they're responsive. We work hard to make them work just as well for viewing on mobile devices as well as tablets and PCs. The key to me of the success of StoryMaps is that they incorporate interactive builders. So you can use this little block palette that we'll show you later to be able to piece together a story without needing any technical skills like HTML and JavaScript and all that stuff that I don't know myself. So StoryMaps are hosted by Esri in the cloud, and that means that you don't have to worry about hosting servers and things. And it's been a very exciting few years. They've grown very rapidly in popularity, and we are quickly approaching 1 million story maps hosted on our GIS Online, and actually there are also many more that are on enterprise systems or behind firewalls. So that's really the basics of story maps, and now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how story maps are being used. One of the fun parts of our job is that we're discovering, we continue to discover new uses that you and people like you have come up with for story maps, uses that we might not have anticipated. One that we certainly did anticipate is public engagement. So if you belong to a government agency or a school or a nonprofit or you name it, you can use story maps to inform the public and get them involved in your efforts. You can also use it to inspire people to essentially to rally people to a cause. And one of the things we like to see in story maps are calls to action in the form of buttons or links. So lots of groups like, say, Amnesty International are using story maps for that purpose. They're increasingly being used, just like I'm using it right now, for briefings and presentations. So I've pretty much given up on PowerPoint. Not that PowerPoint isn't powerful, but we think story maps have their own unique power and can be really useful for presentations. They're also, very much to our excitement and pleasure, are exploding in the classroom. So more and more teachers are using story maps for instructional purposes, but then they're also turning to their students and say, okay, now it's your turn to create a story map. And we find that students discover story maps and enjoy them as a much more kind of engaging alternative to the traditional research paper or term paper. Story maps are really great for personal narratives. This is something I do myself, so every time I come back from a vacation, I feel this irresistible urge to create story maps. and I urge you to do the same. We see a lot of story maps about sort of geography-related topics, and that's great, but we all have our own personal geographies, our own personal experiences, and story maps can be a great way to recount those for our family and friends, etc. Sometimes story maps are being used as annual reports. Some large nonprofits like Rotary International, for instance, have done story map versions of their annual reports. Introducing your staff or company. So this is the, I'm forgetting the name of the nonprofit, but at any rate, their GIS team is scattered across the country, and they use the story map to locate them and provide little bios. They can be used as online guides. So a guy named Dan Coe in the state of Washington created a beautiful story map that is essentially an online guide to the trees of the Pacific Northwest using his own beautiful photographs. We also sometimes create story maps as sort of mini atlases. So in this case, we did a story map on forests of the world in a sort of narrative form, but then we put the maps together into a mini sort of atlas so that GIS people could and the general public could kind of sample the maps and link directly to source data for those maps. Sometimes a small nonprofit will use a story map to create, it's essentially as a mini website, and it's a powerful enough combination of elements in a story map that you can really do that. You can also use them to promote an event and show people who are planning to attend an event where facilities are and best routes to the event, etc. I'm moving through this quickly because we want to get beyond this to the meat of the presentation. Lots of, say, landscape design firms, architecture firms are using them to story maps to show their kind of portfolios. We use story maps quite a bit, and other colleagues across Esri are using story maps for instructional purposes, and you can do the same. So we've done story maps on how to build story maps or how to tell a good story, etc. And then for politics and constituent engagement, so we've seen some campaign story maps, including Senator Tester from Montana, showing how he's traveled all over the state and served the cause of citizens across the state. Binders and catalogs. So what we mean there is that this is especially useful in emergency management. So let's say a hurricane is approaching the coast of the United States. Emergency management agencies will use story maps to essentially collect various online resources to make them easily accessible via one web address. Real estate are using it. Real estate companies are using it to display their portfolios of lands and buildings for sale. And then we've seen a number of cases where people are using story maps as a resume. And Amanda Huber, who's now happily employed in Minnesota, used the story map to help her find that job. And by the way, just this morning, and not for the first time, I found a story map that a couple was using to announce their wedding and show and kind of organize their wedding plans. So we look forward to continued imaginative ways to use story maps. And with that, I'm gonna move on.
Thanks a lot, Alan. So hopefully that gives you a sense for some of the ways people are using story maps to engage with their audiences and to help communicate their work. Now we'll move on to our featured speaker. So I'm really excited today to have Gabby Salazar with us to be able to talk about her visual storytelling. I'm going to just share a quick bio so that you guys get to know Gabby a little bit. And we're really excited because she's actually on our call and will be doing a screen share with us in a little bit. So just to give you a little background on Gabby, Gabby Salazar is an award-winning conservation photographer and National Geographic explorer. Her work has taken her around the world, from Indonesia to Peru and even to the small island nation of Mauritius. Gabby's latest project is perhaps her most ambitious yet. She's pursuing a PhD from the University of Florida, where she studies the effectiveness of media on conservation and environmental awareness campaigns. Join me in welcoming Gabby Salazar to our webinar.
Hi, Oh, I see a Go Gators in the, yeah, I have, it's a big thing down here in the University of Florida. I'm excited to be here, Ross. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Gabby, you are our first featured storyteller here on StoryMaps Live. We're really excited to kick it off with you. And the goal of this is to feature various storytellers within the StoryMaps community to learn about their creative process, to share techniques on how to get started with visual storytelling, problems that they've run into, and also how we can all share knowledge with each other to make it easier to reach our audiences. So with that, Gabby, do you want to share a little bit about your work and walk us through a story map that you've worked on?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll just mention a little bit about the type of work that I do, and then we'll talk about that in the context of this story map, which is about a volcano project that actually Ross and I got to work on together in the field. And so basically, as a visual storyteller, I use a combination of different types of media to tell stories. So sometimes I use photography, sometimes I use video, and sometimes I have to use infographics because a lot of the work I do is with scientists. And of course, maps also come into that a lot, particularly when I'm communicating about places or landscape features that people may not be familiar with. And that was definitely the case when we were working on this project in Guatemala, which was on a volcano, because we all have heard about volcanoes, but maybe there are things about volcanoes that could be better explained using different types of media. And so basically, this project took us to Guatemala, where we did a multi-day expedition to the top of a volcano with a volcanologist named Dr. Stephanie Grokey. And I'm going to go ahead and share the screen so you guys can see this. So this is the actual story map that we created. And this story map shows you the story that we wanted to tell about this expedition. This is one of 2 story maps that we've actually produced with Ross's help about this expedition. So the other story map kind of tells the story in your scientist goes out in the field and they do research and they encounter some challenges and they learn some things and then they finish their expedition. And that is certainly a wonderful way to tell a story of science in the field or conservation in the field. But I wanted to share this version of the story map that we produced because it's a little bit different. And I think it's an interesting example of science communication and how you could actually use the same materials and same images and graphics and just combine them differently with text to tell a story in a different way and perhaps engage a different audience. So basically, you can see that in this story map, we use a combination of maps. We also use photos from the expedition. And this story map, as I said, tells the story differently, and that we actually tell the story of this volcano research expedition where we were trying to understand a little bit more about volcanic eruptions using time-lapse photography. That was the goal or mission of the expedition. It tells it from the perspective of the volcano, from the perspective of the communities, and you see here the communities in chapter 2, and then also from the perspective of the scientist. And so we use this kind of chapter feature in story maps to kind of move seamlessly between these different perspectives, integrating photos that illustrate the different chapters, but also using that text to kind of back that up. And it's really fun because it's told from the perspective of the volcano kind of waking up, or the volcano seeing, time as this like long, expansive, thing, whereas the communities see the volcano in their backyard every day, and the scientist just wants to get the data about the volcano. And so we're able to incorporate some of those facts and some of the information about the expedition while also kind of making it a little bit more fun and engaging. What I love about story maps is that we can also, of course, incorporate these wonderful maps, which allow people to really visualize like exactly where we were. So you can see where it says Santa Maria, that is where we were camping. And you can read about that in the text and then actually get a better idea of our research setup, which was essentially camping on top of Santa Maria and then pointing our cameras down at these domes below, Caliente and La Mitad. And so that's really helpful. And then we also were able to incorporate infographics. that help explain the inside of the volcano, something that I could not take photos of no matter how much I planned. And that's really where we're able to put these in a really effective way and think strategically about, you know, at this point in the story, what is the best type of, what type of media is going to be, are going to be most effective at communicating the message that we want to communicate. And we can also just incorporate some beautiful images that kind of give you a sense of what it's like to be there. And I think one of the things as I'm walking through this, so here's another map that we incorporated, which I mentioned before. This actually shows the research site and includes data from our hike. So you can actually see the path that we took up the volcano, which I think is really fun. And there's just it's just kind of limitless ways that you could use this to tell a story. I think one of the things I will say as I'm walking you through this is if you're not a visual storyteller, if you don't have a background in storytelling, I think it's useful to look at some of these examples and kind of get a sense of the type of images and graphics that people use in their stories, so that if you are going out to tell a news story, you can plan a little bit. Because I think that's probably where a lot of people get caught out, is that they come back and then they sit down to do the story map. And then they think, oh, I should have gotten an image of the landscape or the place we stayed or a close-up of, you know, the people that were part of our team. And so I think that that's a really important point that I'd just like to emphasize, is I actually do a storyboard before I do a story map. So I actually kind of, you know, take a piece of paper and write out all of the different images I anticipate needing to be able to tell the story that I want to tell. And that way, when I'm in the field, I'm a lot more prepared if I see, like, come across a situation and think, oh, here, it would actually be really helpful to have a photo of the tents that we camped in to give a perspective of what it looks like at the top of that mountain, and to give people a feel and a sense for what it looks like, so that this image, this map image, actually comes to life in a completely different way. So that's what I would really recommend, is just thinking about and planning out using this tool ahead of time, rather than just using it, you know, at the end as kind of a blog post, because it's so much more than that, and it provides so much more richness if you're able to think through that storytelling.
That's really great, Gabby. Thanks so much for sharing that. So we want to make this into more of a conversation with you, Gabby. We are standing by at the live chat, so if you have questions for Gabby, feel free to add those in at any point, and we'll integrate those into the questions that we have and the discussion that we want to have about visual storytelling, getting started with story maps, and how to be better communicators and storytellers. So, Gabby, you have so much experience as a conservation photographer. I was curious if you could just start off by talking a little bit about your creative process in photography and how that experience has translated to visual storytelling more generally, and even informed your current work.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I started photography when I was 11 years old. So, and I really started just taking beautiful images of nature because I like spending time outside. And that was what motivated me when I got started. And then I realized that, you know, I could actually help, hopefully through images, if I were able to take the right images, to engage people in learning or in causes in a way that they maybe hadn't been engaged before, because they hadn't known about the cause, but also maybe nothing had pulled at their heartstrings. And I really saw art and images as a way to do that. And so I started learning more about how you actually take not just one image that's really beautiful, but take a series of images that can help piece together a story and piece together a narrative or support text. And I started working with conservation organizations, and I learned a lot working with them and working with scientists, because it's not just about me as an artist coming in as a storyteller and saying, this is the story I want to tell. It's really a collaborative process. So that's a big part of my work, is actually sitting down with people who don't do this type of work, but know they need to reach public audiences, and trying to figure out what the story is and how we can frame it and how we can tell it in a way that's most effective for the specific people they want to reach.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's so true. And yeah, it's been really exciting to see how your work has evolved from just, beautiful, conservation photography to actually doing videos and educational workshops with children, and now as an academic studying how they can have more of an impact, how different forms of media can have a bigger impact on communities. Grayson, just let me know if there are questions from the audience.
Ross, I think, I didn't really touch on that, but so I'm at the very beginning of my kind of academic journey. So I definitely have a lot more questions than I have answers. But I think that's what really got me interested in this, is how could these stories be shaped or framed, or outreach campaigns by conservation organizations be framed to engage the people and audiences they want to engage with. So I think a lot of times we're just kind of throwing a lot of messages out into the world, hoping that somebody's going to grasp onto one. And just like advertising and marketing uses a lot of targeted approaches, that's one of the things I'm really interested in. And so I think that that's an important point to point out with these story maps, is maybe it's not all about how many clicks you get, but about who's clicking.
Great. We actually got a couple of questions here from
Sure.
the live studio audience. From N. James, they are asking, specific features of story maps that you found useful in telling stories that other mediums lacked.
Sure, that's a great question. I think for me, it's a really great, clean platform that works really well and functionally on different screens. And I know that sounds very basic, but it actually makes a huge difference in terms of your ability to keep an audience engaged, is just to have this kind of really nice, visual appealing platform. Like, I love this format where I can put kind of a gallery in this kind of seamless way so that I can move between images to illustrate a point. I think also, I'll just pull up to one of these maps, just being, and other platforms may be able to do some of these features, but I also think the big thing is that you can insert these interactive maps, and that somebody without, programming experience or a lot of expertise can actually do this quite easily. And so, I've been to a 1-hour workshop on story maps and felt pretty confident about my ability to put together a story map after that. And I think that that's a really important point, is that it's not clunky. It's pretty easy to use.
Great. Another question here, and maybe this is also a question for Ross as well, but how do you integrate data into your maps? I think maybe that's asking, how do you choose when to show data and how you show it and in what ways?
That's a great question. And I think, the example that I showed below, which that is data of our, map, I think we were tracking our path up the mountain. That was a great way to incorporate data we'd actually collected in the field into the story map so that it felt a little bit more real and also put us in context. So I think just like the visual storytelling elements, thinking about what data you could collect while you're in the field, or what data you could collect. There's so much data freely available online. How could you use data to enhance your message is a really important point. But I think Ross can probably speak more to specifically how you could incorporate data, given your background, Ross.
I certainly have lots of thoughts on this. I think fundamentally it comes down to thinking about your audience and purpose behind the story you're trying to tell, and maybe the map that you're trying to make. And so that will inform what types of data and when it's appropriate to add data visualizations, whether it's an interactive map, a static infographic. And a lot of the times, we have so much data out there that it can be a big time sink, and it can be a lot of rabbit holes to go down to get the data that you're looking for. And so you can save a lot of time in your story crafting or creative process if you can really identify those key data sets that are most valuable to, at the end of the day, your audience and purpose behind the stories that you're trying to tell. Hopefully that helps get at that.
Yeah, I think, Ross, I kind of think, and we've talked about this before too, it's like when you have a lot of photos, so as an artist, you get very attached to things. And I'm sure as a data scientist, you get very attached to things as well, because you're like, oh, I put so much time into this and it's really great. But I think ultimately you have to ask at each point in the story, does this graphic or does this piece of data or does this map move my story and my message forward, or does it distract? Right. And so, and that could, you could do a story map that is just beautiful visuals from a trip you took. And that's a completely fine way, if that's the purpose of the story map, is to like show the landscape and show the visuals and illustrate your experience. But in the case of this, we definitely, this volcano story map, we took out images that we really loved because they didn't add anything to the story that we were trying to tell.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking back now to, when we were in our hotel room going through photos and just, trying to make that selection, and how hard that was to say, we want to be able to communicate the importance of this place, but this image is maybe better than this one, even though they're both beautiful images. And I really liked how during this project, for the photo exhibit that we produced, it wasn't just about that one individual image, but how the images fit together to communicate a message. And I think that speaks to your experience with crafting the story from the images and having them work as a sequence and sort of having a beginning, middle, and end, or a narrative arc to it as well.
Yeah, I think like having that planning document is so important. And I think if there's one thing that people who are interested in doing this could take away, I mean, there's entire courses that we could talk about on storytelling and what components make up a story. But broadly, if you can get kind of a scene setter that broadly shows the landscape that you're working in, and the landscape could be, an office building. It doesn't have to be a volcano or like a national park. The characters, who are they? Is there a moment of action that you can illustrate? And are there some detail images that you can take as well, just to add some visual diversity to the story so that it's interesting? Because a lot of times we just shoot everything with our iPhones, which you can get, you have the ability to move with your iPhone, to get different perspectives. And so you can do all of this with a smartphone, but you just have to be creative.
We're going to transition away from questions here in a second,
Sure.
but there's a really good one about video. And so Julius is asking, what would you consider as appropriate strategy to incorporate video? It seems that story maps can become very slow to load and can take away from the essence in terms of providing quick access to info. So how did you guys use videos in your story?
So the other story that we made using this project does incorporate a short video. I think of them more for this purpose, more like moving pictures. Kind of, they provide movement and engagement and give you a more of a sense of the landscape. You could certainly incorporate a 2 to 3 minute video into a story map, I believe. Like, you could incorporate a longer piece, but I would tend to incorporate shorter pieces personally, just because otherwise it slows the momentum of the kind of the narrative and moving through the story itself. But that's just my opinion, and it would really kind of depend. But you could incorporate a time lapse. You could incorporate, a really short 10-second video. And once again, it's a matter of planning for that. We often forget to take videos when we're focused on taking photos, or forget to take photos when we're focused on taking videos.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I would also add GIF images in there, because sometimes if you do just need that 3-second clip, you can create a GIF, which is relatively lightweight, and it loads fairly quickly, and you can have a similar experience as you would in the video.
Yeah, and videos can really help break up kind of walls of text. So as a reader is getting more engrossed in their story, you want to keep them engaged throughout. And so adding video content can be a nice break from just a bunch of text or still images.
Great. Well, we need to move on. I want to address really quickly a question here, because I think a lot of people have this, but is there a good rule of thumb for the length of a story map? And I'll just jump in quickly, because really there is no right length for a story map. As a general rule, we'd like to think about that shorter is usually more, or less is usually more, so shorter is usually better. But it really boils down to what's your message and who you're trying to reach, and sort of what is that audience's expectation, and what are their expectations for scrolling, if they'll make it through the whole thing, and is it so long or so short that they're going to miss your message. That's really considerations you have to take in that planning stage that Gabby was talking about.
Gabby, just in closing, do you have any closing thoughts for the StoryMaps community, and where can folks and/or are there places where folks can learn more about your work or see something?
Sure. I would just say, you know, we've given an example from a science communication kind of angle here today, but I love the idea of using these for annual reports for nonprofits or for other, you know, in other contexts that just, you know, we're competing with a lot of different other media outlets these days and other draws on our attention. And so this is a great, I think it's a great way to try and kind of get your message out there, no matter what that message or story is. And if anybody wants to follow my work, I'm at on Instagram and Twitter at Gabby R. Salazar, GABBYR SALAZAR. So thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Gabby.
Thank you, Gabby.
Thanks, Gabby.
And if I could ask you to stop sharing, and then I will take over from there.
Great. So now we're going to turn things over to Grayson, who's going to give a demo of the ArcGIS StoryMaps builder and how to get started with ArcGIS StoryMaps.
Great. Thank you, Ross. And thank you, Gabby. So if anyone was attending our live training seminar a couple weeks ago, some of this will look familiar. But I'm going to basically go through showing you how to get to StoryMaps and get started, to launch a new story map from scratch, and also some of the more advanced tricks that you can do within the builder for really telling a story that's as rich and as engaging as the volcano story that we just saw a moment ago. So to get you going, there's really two main routes that I'll point out for you to get to StoryMaps. So I think a lot of you might be coming at StoryMaps from ArcGIS Online. And so you're gonna go to ArcGIS Online however you normally would. I usually go to arcgis.com and click sign in. And I'm going to log into our organization that we have here, supplying my username and password. And from your organizations or your homepage here, you're going to find an app launcher up here in the corner, and StoryMaps are there. Now, I would like to point out that if some of you are not enterprise organizations with a subscription, you're going to see something a little bit different. You're not going to have this app launcher, or actually, I'm sorry, you will see the app launcher. But when you're logging in, keep in mind that if you have not made a ArcGIS Online account before, you have the option for a free public account that you can create. Now, there are some limitations on what you can do with ArcGIS StoryMaps, but you can more or less use the full suite of functionalities, and you can get a lot of mileage out of that free option as well. All right, so you can go to StoryMaps here. The other route that you can get to StoryMaps is by going directly to our StoryMaps webpage. So a short link for that is esri.com/storymaps. So when I come here, you're going to get some information about the product, which you're welcome to explore. I also want to point out a couple resources we have on this page. For one, Explore Stories, which is a fantastic resource for going to learn about recent story maps that have been made with ArcGIS StoryMaps. Find those examples that Gabby suggested looking at to figure out what you can do, what is possible, and really start planning out your story in advance. Hear from other featured storytellers, and then we also have stories that you can browse by thematic area. I also want to point out the resources tab that we have, and this I hope will be your go-to learning resource. We have a variety of instructional documents here. We have this little application to walk you through that planning, building, and publication process. And we have a whole lot of other lessons, tutorials, blogs, videos to help you build your skills as you continue to work with ArcGIS StoryMaps. Now, actually building a story map. Well, from our homepage, you can click Launch ArcGIS StoryMaps here in the corner. which will take you to my stories. Now, I was already logged in because I'd gone to arcgis.com first, but you may see another window here that will prompt you to sign in. And when you first come here, this is going to be empty because you've never built any story maps before. Now, as you can see, I've got a draft story that I've been working on, and I'm going to go into just in a second. But for now, I just want to point out, to start a new story, you're going to create a new story. That's going to launch us directly into the story builder. And this is a blank story map. It doesn't have any content in it yet, but this is essentially your palette. This is where you can compose your content all together. You can type in your text or copy and paste from a Word document if you're planning that out in advance. You have a byline here that is automatically powered off of your user, but you can certainly change this to be whatever you like. This is a placeholder for a cover. You can add images and videos. And then you can build out your content down here with this add content block, which is really it's a simple but really the core of the software, because under this what we call the block palette is essentially the menu of all the items and media types that you can add to this story. So if you are one of our classic StoryMaps users, so you're familiar with layouts like Cascade or Map Tour or Map Journal, the way that we are centralizing all those different experiences in one place is right here, by adding those experiences as an individual block that then you can then put together flexibly all in one place. You don't have to switch between layouts.
I'm actually happy that you mentioned the classic templates. We have a question that came in from Patrick. What's going to happen with the classic series? Will they be depreciated, unsupported at some point? Will there be any updates to the templates?
Yeah, so they're going to be around for a long time. We're going to continue to maintain them with security updates. They're not going to receive new enhancements, so we're not adding new functionality to them because ArcGIS StoryMaps is the successor to those classic apps. But the roadmap for them, you're going to be able to continue to build them for a good long while now, and they're going to continue to be available online indefinitely, as far as we have heard so far.
Ultimately, after many, many months, you'll be able to edit existing stories but not create new stories.
Right.
And then ultimately, it will be all the new story maps, our GIS story maps. But again, this is many months in the future. It's like a 5-year plan.
It's a 5-year plan, and that's a minimum plan. So if we fall behind on anything, that timeline's only going to extend.
But we're not going to.
Of course not.
Unless you continue things.
Unless I keep talking too much. Going back to the block palette here, the key here is that you can add any one of these blocks simply by clicking it. And these can be simple blocks like paragraph, paragraph text, subheading, so on and so forth, to more sophisticated blocks such as design elements like buttons, separators, quotes, lists, to really rich experiences like embedded content, images, and videos, and then the real hallmark of StoryMaps, things like interactive maps and this block that we call sidecar, which I'll show you more of just in a second. So that's the rundown on adding content. I also wanted to give you a quick tour of what you're seeing in the header here, because this is another innovation with ArcGIS StoryMaps. So first of all, note the badge up here in the corner that says draft. So this is telling me that this is a draft of a story. It is not available to anyone to see yet. And as I publish this out to my organization or to the world, this badge will change to reflect that change. Also notice that this message here indicates that my story is saved. That is because there's an autosave function going on in the background, so I never have to actually click save to make sure that my additions are saved. One of the major innovations, which is under this design panel, is that we're centralizing all of the global styling choices that you have within the story. So rather than going through and changing individual text colors and different treatments of that sort, you have a selection of themes. So choosing a different theme will change everything within the story, from the font pairings to the color theme of the background to the accent colors used in separator bars and buttons and other design elements. Currently, we have 4 themes, and we are planning to expand those out into half a dozen, a dozen. We don't know yet. We don't know how many you all need, so let us know. You also have different cover choices, from full cover to partial cover, to simple covers for, say, more like a blog experience, and the ability to customize certain elements like accent colors and even entering in your own RGB hex value, say, to match a marketing or branding theme, or just the theme of your story. Being able to choose the font pairings that appear in that particular theme, and also being able to upload an organizational logo or even a personal logo if you, say, run your own company. And you can find that all under the design panel. Up here in the header, you can also find an option to preview the story. So obviously there's not a lot going on here, but the preview should look more or less like what it looks like in the editor, because it's a what you see is what you get experience. And before I get to publish, I want to point out these 3 dots here to the menu, because this is actually a recent enhancement that we just released at the end of August. Under story settings, what you have here is a Google Analytics spot where you can enter your Google Analytics code. So if you do have Google Analytics and you're looking to track those metrics on your stories, insert that here, and that information will start appearing in your Google Analytics dashboard. And then, as I mentioned, sort of the end of the workflow here is to actually publish out your story currently to an organization. Again, this is something that's only relevant if you are an organizational subscriber. If you're a personal user, you're not going to see this option, or just making it public and publishing it to the world. Now, I wanted to show you a story with some actual content built out in it. So let me switch back over to my stories. And you see that this is that new story I just created a moment ago, but I'm going to go into this draft that I've been working on. This was a story I used for demonstrations about the top destination cities of the world. You can see the title and subtitle filled out. I've uploaded a video as my cover. And I mentioned those different cover options earlier, but I can switch to, say, side-by-side cover. I can switch how the media and the text relate to each other. Or I could even do that minimal cover, which minimizes the media, and I can even remove that media if I like, and just go straight into the title, subtitle, etc. And here you can see more of the content built out. So some headings, a quote here, subheadings, lists. Here's an image. This is a standard JPEG image. Now I notice that the top left here is this little handle. Now if I grab that and move it around, I can reorder content within this story. So now I just drag that image up a little ways. Also, when I'm hovering on any media item, I have different size options that I can set it to, including this float, where any text that follows a floated item will kind of float up next to it. Another real power of StoryMaps, as we've mentioned, is the ability to embed content from almost anywhere, as long as the site itself, wherever it's coming from, supports embedded content. I can do that here. So I've got an operations dashboard, which is another web mapping application available in ArcGIS Online. And using this embed block, I can copy and paste in that URL for that ops dashboard and add it directly into my story. And notice that I've chosen that dark theme for this story, Obsidian, and I've styled this operations dashboard to match that theme, so it blends seamlessly within the story, and now I have data-driven infographics to go along with it. Let's keep scrolling here, and this is that sidecar block that we talked about. And you can see here that what sidecar does, and let me just expand the film strip here at the bottom. Sidecar allows you to stack up slides of various multimedia, so images, videos, maps, and then have these nice transitions between them. In particular, I'll show you what we call map choreography. So this is a web map, and there are 2 views of this web map. So one is zoomed out, kind of a more global view, and this next one zooms into Southeast Asia, which is focusing on the city of Bangkok. And the way I did that, so the experience is as I scroll, I then navigate to that area based upon the scroll. And the way that that experience is created is by going to this slide, clicking these 3 dots in the corner, duplicating the slide. Now I have essentially 2 of the same views of the single map. But on this last view, I'm going to go into edit it, And simply by panning and zooming, I'm going to change the extent that that map appears at. And so once I'm ready, I'm going to place this map. And now let's review what just happened. So I already had 2 slides, global, zooms into Southeast Asia, and then moving on to the last one, zooming into the area of Bangkok. And so this is a way to essentially create almost map animations, but in a geographic sense, you're also setting the geographic context, or say doing a tour of some places using this map choreography technique. One of the other innovations that some of you may have heard about is the introduction of a simple mapping tool called ExpressMap. So this slide, I actually have an ExpressMap in here rather than a web map. And what ExpressMaps allow you to do, I'm just going to go in and edit this ExpressMap I already added here, is to use a variety of annotation tools. So, these can be simple things like points. You can draw lines, polygons, even add annotation text directly on top of the map itself. And dragging from the top or the bottom, you can link this to any feature on this map, and that will stay anchored. And if you notice over here, everything I was adding to this map becomes essentially a layer within this map. And you can change the particular accent color of a certain type of layer. So the points will all be a single color, lines will all be a single color, and areas will all be a single color. And when you're ready, you can place this map. Now, the nice thing about ExpressMaps in particular is that when I am in design and I change the theme, ExpressMaps will be affected as well to make sure that all elements, styled elements, stay in line with one another and these look consistently composed. One last thing I wanted to point out about StoryMaps in general. Let's go back here to the sidecar. On any media element, say a map, an image, a video, if you hover over it and find this properties icon, you're going to find some advanced features. So depending on whether these are relevant, you'll see different options here. But at most, you're going to be able to set the focal point of an image. So if an image is getting cropped, you can make sure that the subject of the image will always stay in focus no matter what device size it appears on. You can choose, if it is an image in a sidecar, that it does not get cropped. That way you won't have to worry about something like a focus point. And this is what you will see in all media items, is the option to enter alternative text. So this is a place where you can make your stories more accessible to folks coming to a page, say with a screen reader. And last but not least, when you're ready to go out to the world, you go to publish it. I'm going to go ahead and publish it to everyone and push this out. We'll check the health of your story, so make sure everything is shared equally. So this web map needed to be shared from my organization to everyone to limit the possibility that you have a broken story at the end of publication. So let me go back quickly to my stories as I wrap up here. One of the innovations, or one of the enhancements rather, that we just released at the end of August was something called collections. So I want to point out that if you go up to your icon here, we have it a little bit hidden initially because it is still in beta, but you have this option for My Collections. And under My Collections, what this allows you to do is to bring together a collection of stories around a particular theme or topic. So I have a collection I've already created here, and you can see that this is actually how we're presenting to you right now. So this is not unlike a series in the past, but this is a way for you to show a filtered view that looks pretty nice, give it a title, give it a brief description, and order a list of resources for people to use. And then with this little play button right here, you can actually launch that collection into its presentation mode, which is what you've been seeing today. And there we have it. We have our presentation. I'm going to bring us back up to where we were right here, which is, well, what's coming next? So to recap really quickly, Some of the new functionalities we added in August included more cover options, a couple more of those themes, collections, which I just showed you, that area to add Google Analytics, and then some nice improvements like dragging and reordering media, being able to change the individual colors of layers in those express maps, and choreographing web maps in that sidecar block. And then, of course, a number of smaller refinements. And some things to look forward to include many more themes are coming down the pipeline. And for those of you familiar with our classic apps, really get excited about Map Tour because we're going to be completely re-envisioning it. And also we're thinking through some other important elements like being able to print the story map if you have to go offline, what we've formerly called story actions, but the ability to add interactive buttons and options that a reader can interact with and then make something change within the story, like switching a map and a graphic or navigating to a place on a map, and lots of other interactive features like that. We're looking into a slideshow layout that will give you a horizontal scrolling experience, and express maps are really in their infancy, so there's a lot more coming there. All right, so I hear that there's a ton of really good questions. Do we even know where to begin?
So we're really excited about all the questions you guys have been asking, and we're going to try to spend the rest of the time answering these questions as well as pointing you to resources to learn more about what's coming, what we've done, how to incorporate and use these various tools. So one question is, when will you be adding bookmarks and the ability to change font colors for various items?
That's on the list, but I don't think we have a particular date for it. But it's something that we ourselves are eager to see when we create our own story maps. Wish I could be more specific. But.
Yeah, it's definitely in our roadmap, and hearing from the users that this is a feature that you want helps us prioritize which features to incorporate next into ArcGIS StoryMaps. So we'll communicate that to the developers as they kind of add new things.
Mm-hmm. This is a good opportunity to point out how you can send us feedback. So from either my stories or from within the story builder itself, you're going to see this little question mark icon for help in the corner. And if you click that, not only can you get back to our main web page, find FAQs and resources and documentation, but you have this option to provide us feedback, where you can send us directly information about any questions, technical issues, and even ideas for improvement or just some general product feedback. So very much encourage you to send us your feedback there. We're keeping it all in one place, and we can really get a sense of what we should be prioritizing.
And it might seem like this is just a black box, but rest assured, we look at these all the time. We are compiling which features are being requested more than others, and that gets into our production of new features within the tool. Next question, what is the best resolution for the slider images? Can two images be floated next to each other in the regular content outside of the slider?
By slider, I guess that's sidecars that we're talking about. All right, so floating, currently you have one option for floating, which is that to the side on the left. We're certainly considering being able to float on the right, also being able to have a gallery of images, which isn't really a float, but actually having a series of 2, 3, 4, etc. images that reorder and sort nicely in a grid fashion. As far as resolution for images, it's more than just about sidecar, but just images in general. It's good to have, well, I would recommend 2,000 pixels wide. In general, it's going to give you good resolution on any screen size. And that's also a requirement within StoryMaps to be able to go to the full width option.
So another way to put it is that StoryMaps, when you upload your images, it's good to have them be pretty large size, because then the StoryMap actually optimizes your images for display. So they'll actually reduce the resolution in certain contexts so that your images load fast. But if you've got a small image, as you said, Grace, then it actually won't display full screen, because they'd rather have it not appear than have it look really awful.
That's a good point. So you can always go smaller, but you can't make a picture larger.
Yeah.
And that's also one of the ways that we're having new story maps load faster, is that optimization, so that only the right resolution image is getting served up for the right size screen.
There's been some questions about how to create an express map. Can we just briefly show that process one more time? Because express maps is a very exciting and powerful tool to be able to really quickly create a simple map in minutes.
Absolutely. So why don't we go ahead and just launch a whole new story. So I clicked on that Create New Story, launching the story builder, and then under the block palette, if I add content and I go to Map, this is the map browser, and if I have any web maps in here, they'll appear as well. If my organization have any maps, I can find those there. Or I can start an express map from directly within this, the story builder. We have some onboarding help that will walk you through how to use this. And basically, you have a brand new express map ready to go. So you can zoom into an area, you can search by a location or an address, you can add those different annotations right here. Also point out that you have property options, or you have a few other controls, such as showing or not showing a legend. You can also switch between the gray base that goes with this, the light summit theme. Each theme is going to have a different selection of base maps to choose from, or an alternative gray base, depending on what kind of data or information you want to show. And once you're ready and you're done with your map, you go to Place Map, and then it will appear more or less exactly how you set it up within the map designer. And just like an image or a video, you can choose how large you want it to appear at. You can choose to float it if you want. And any maps, whether they're express maps or web maps, there's always this option to expand that map to full width as a reader, so that you can.
And when you go into the Express Map Builder, just explore the toolbar, because you'll be able to add numbered icons, just regular icons. You can create simple routes and areas. So there's quite a bit you can do with Express Maps, and more to come.
We are running out of time, so I think this question is actually fitting one to end on. Can the questions be updated on the StoryMaps Q&A? The questions are really good, and there are a lot of them. It would be nice to go back and reference the answers. So my interpretation of that is that the questions that were asked during this webinar today, can those be available online, and the answers be available online? So short answer is yes. We will provide a recorded copy of this video to everyone, both if you participated, as well as it will be a resource online. Why don't we go to the next slide?
Quick announcement before we get to the resources. Because some of you may have heard previously, we have a competition going on right now, StoryMaps competition. It's called the StoryMaps of the Year. And this is a special year because we've been doing this for a few years now, but we actually have a $5,000 grand prize and a number of smaller $1,000 prizes. We've actually extended the deadline on this because we've been introducing so many new people to StoryMaps. We're wanting to give them an opportunity to submit. So this will be going on until mid-December of this year. So definitely check out the StoryMapper contest website to learn all the details about how to submit. But we really would love to see the kind of work that you're producing and give you a shot at winning the contest. And now those resources, Ross.
Now those resources. So we want to thank you all for joining us for the webinar today. We can't wait to see what you create. Be sure to keep in touch. We've provided our emails, our Twitter handles, and social handles. So feel free to reach out to us if you have additional questions. These are great links to just either take a screenshot of or jot down. These are anything from the website where you would go to get started to subscribing to Planet StoryMaps newsletter, where you can get the latest stories that are being created and new content that we're producing. So again, feel free to reach out to us. Use that the feedback survey to be able to submit enhancements that you'd like to see to the product. And let us know if you thought this was useful and whether we should keep doing these in the future and how we can improve them. Our plan right now is to do them about quarterly. So whenever there's a new release of ArcGIS StoryMaps with new enhancements, we will put out a new webinar, being able to communicate those to you and provide new resources and feature new storytellers. So I want to thank my colleagues for joining.
Thanks so much for coming. Really appreciate it, and we can't wait to see your stories.
It was great to answer and talk about your questions, and looking forward to seeing what you do. One really quick addition. So you will be receiving an email and follow-up to this webinar. Will include a link to the video, a link to these resources, as well as an opportunity to provide us feedback on what you found useful or maybe not so useful about this webinar. And thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.